Okay then, it's time for another video. It's been a while, and well, my topic today is going to be bad Christian, good Christian, religious, non-religious. What are you? And I'm just going to hold up this book here. There we go. I'm not going to read it, but I'm just going to refer to it really. It's called How to Be a Bad Christian. And it's it's really written by a guy called Dave Tomlinson, and he wrote it, I think, out of a necessity really, because he met so many people who'd fallen out of church and felt written off, felt no good, and so they ended up not being in the religious community any longer. And his observations, I mean, it's a great book. He meets many people here, and they're just being who they are, and they're living, dare I say, Christian lives. They're living, caring about others, living up to the best of their ability, but they're not. They can't necessarily deal with the religious structure. And anyway, it's a great book, but I'm not going to read from it. But I will read a couple of quotes, because at the beginning of each chapter you have an interesting quote, usually not from your run-of-the-mill Christian speakers, but various people. Like this one's from Lenny Bruce, who was a comedian, and he puts, "Every day people are straying away from the church and going back to God." That's quite profound. That's it's not what you are or what you have been that God looks at with his merciful eyes, but what you desire to be. That's from The Cloud of Unknowing. Don't know that book, but I've heard of it. Okay, Laughing with God is one of the chapters, and it's how to get to heaven by having a good time. As a rule, it was the pleasure haters who became unjust. W.H. Auden, again, not heard of him. So yeah, I can't recommend this book. I actually haven't read it all yet. And how to dump bad choices and make good ones. It's our choices, Harry, that show us what we truly are, far more than our abilities. Right, who was that? Right, that was the name Harry in there was a bit of a giveaway. That's from J.K. Rowling, so I'm guessing that's from one of the books. I've not read any of those books. So yeah, so my experience was many years within the church structure of Christian practice have been mixed with bitter sweet, I would say. And there's been sweet times. There's been times of you just meet people, and they become friends for life. And I have friends for life who I've met within the church structure. But the bitter is when you come against, I won't say rules, because more like practices. Yeah, these kind of I can't think of the word now, but yeah, like practices, and each church group would have different kind of statements of faith. Now, the statements of faith, usually they're okay. You can look at that and say, yeah, I agree with that. But then you kind of, the problem is you have personalities, because it's a hierarchical structure, and so the strongest characters will rise to the top, and they will become leaders. And the problem you have there is that if the leadership is controlling, dominating, then that's going to trickle down, and people are going to feel dominated. but actually many people like that. They're primed for it, and certainly in my experience, I was had some mental health issues as a teenager. I struggled with being on the spectrum, though back then there wasn't a spectrum as such. People were, there was special needs, but people didn't really understand fully what they were. And certainly I've come to grasp that I have a sort of ADHD type. It's a disorder of the frontal lobe, really, and your executive functioning is challenged. Now, okay, that's that sounds negative, but there's a beauty to it, and I've made other videos, and I'm going to continue to make other videos where I will address this subject, and it's called creative ADHD, and it's how you can just explore who you are as a neurodiverse human being. And well, many of us are neurodiverse. It's not just this kind of 1%. I mean, I'm not sure what the figures are, but there's more than you realise, and some very gifted people have been on the spectrum. Jim Carrey, he's a very gifted comedian. I know he's had his difficulties, but he's right up there on the spectrum, ADHD, and he's just creative, he's intelligent, he's engaging, he's imaginative, he's an entertainer. And yeah, okay, there's a struggle inside, and many of us would know about his difficulties. And the problem with executive brain function is that sometimes you struggle with the emotions that will go with that, because so much goes on in this part of the brain, which is the frontal lobe, and that's where all decisions and choices, which is the same as decisions, isn't it? Just what it is, executive functioning. You just Google it if you, rather than having me explain it. But it's kind of the engine room of your brain. So with that being compromised, with that being struggling, it's an interesting one. I mean, how they say that creativity and emotions and things like that are in different parts of the brain. So therefore, you're not necessarily struggling there. And although there's stories about people having their frontal lobes taken out, and they're just void of emotion. So I'm not a psychologist, so I guess a lot goes on there. Ooh, I've just pulled something down here. So anyway, let's get back to the subject. So another thing about when you're on the spectrum, you can flip from various subjects very easily. So anyway, I was as a young man, I was just early 20s, I had a bit of a breakdown, and I came to a faith in God. I guess I'd always known that God existed. I always knew that God was out there. I couldn't reconcile all that I saw, all the beauty in the world, even though I was experiencing a lot of pain, a lot of grief from my own mixed up emotions and poor choices. I recognised that there was a beauty, and there was a dynamic to life, and I just couldn't have it that just evolved and came about. So my only option was really that there was an intelligent designer. So there I was. I cracked up. I think I've explored this in a previous video, so I won't go too much into it. But anyway, and so I eventually came into the church system, and the church I was in was, well, it had an orthodox statement of faith. You could read it, yeah, and it had some beautiful, lovely people in it. So great, and lots was occurred, which was really good. I'm going to put that in first, but there was certain characters which had risen to the leadership, and I just don't believe that we're designed to have such power over others. I think it just does something to our brains, our emotions. I mean, because we just the way we're wired, we just, and so we had all these aims and precepts, I think they were called, and a lot of them were actually drawn from good ideas, but a lot of them were drawn from kind of control, and yeah, I mean it's quite sad really when I look back now, and there's certain things you couldn't do. Now the problem with that is there was those who could play the game, and they would rise. These were the go-getters, the achievers, and particularly the very able ones. They would be up there on the top of the ladder, and so they would be looking from their position, perhaps at those that couldn't get it together. And yeah, there was grace, yeah, there was understanding, but I think in so many ways people were kept in like littleness. Is that a word, littleness? They were kept small because they couldn't quite break out of their limitations, and they were sort of they would look at these achievers, and so they never really reached their full potential. And I believe that faith Christianity is about your, mine, our full potential. It's because if we have God within us, if we have the life of God, then there's potential. It shouldn't be limited by a natural ability, a doctorate, a title. So you're an elder, you're less than an elder, but you're some other sort of leader. I mean, the church I was in, they had these kind of levels of leadership, and you were encouraged quite quickly to go to these training sessions, and at a certain point you would be given a badge, not literally, but it would be like, now you're this leader. I'm going to avoid using terms because I actually don't want to name the organisation, because that's not really what I'm about. And if I was to do that, someone out there might say, I know what group you're talking about. So you're welcome to try and guess. But it really isn't about this group. I'm not about throwing mud around, and I mean, mud came out anyway. Stuff went pear-shaped there, so I don't need to kind of add to that really. But I mean, I went from that group to another group who were different. They were, because this first group I was in, they were community based in the main. They were perhaps more charismatic, and then I went from there to this very conservative, rigid, I would say now religious group. And again, it was led by this one man who was very, very dominating, very strong, very yeah, and again, it was very toxic because everyone seemed to be trying to please this man, and he had these kind of these high, lofty kind of standards. Really, he'd often talk about evidence, faith, and doing doing the works, serving the Lord. I mean, I probably covered this in a previous video, but yeah. So I mean, I've again gone from there and realising, well, that was so. Are there any churches that are good? In my observation, they all seem to be structured around people. And obviously, you might say, well, what else are you going to structure a church around? And when I say that, I just mean that positionally, that there would be, you would have a group of people, and then each one would have a position. And if you didn't have a position, you would be, ooh, somehow you'd feel incomplete until you were given this position. And one church I go to, I've observed that there's this particular lady, and it seems like her position is to hand out these Bibles, which if somebody doesn't have them, and someone else, their position might be welcoming someone on the door. And I guess all these things need doing, but it's when it becomes like, how much more do you need to do to climb the ladder of acceptability? And I fell into the trap of feeling like I had to perform. I used to write songs, and the meetings would come around, and this is going back again. Yeah, the meetings would come around, and I'd be like, "Oh, I've written a song. Oh, can I get this song out there now?" Because I was even given this name, which demonstrated that I was of that sort of ilk, that I was someone who produced things, which was nice in a way, but then it was a pressure, because it's like you give someone the name energetic, and they may feel like they need to be energized and be lively all the time, and so they have a bad day, and you say, "Hey, why aren't you energetic? That's your name." And so for me, and I think particularly as a neurodiverse person, I would add that it was a pressure. It was, and it was just, yeah. So anyway, I've discovered this book, and I discovered that there's so many people out there that they just feel like they're bad Christians. They feel like they've not made the grade, they've dropped out of church, and but there's hope, because it says how to be a bad Christian and a better human being. And quite often, if you strive to be this ideal Christian, you can become a bad human being, in a sense that there's that expression, no earthly good. You're so heavenly minded that you're no earthly good, and I think that's it. I remember my mother-in-law saying to me once, "Oh, I don't like Christians. They're so what did she say? They're so pompous. They're so stuck up. They just look down on you and can't wait to judge you." And she'd spent some time with these Christians, and I think in before she was married, I think, and when she was a student, and she said they would be in cars, and they would be looking out the cars and saying, "Oh, look at the sinners out there," and driving around central London, and let's pray that they'll be freed from their debauched lifestyles, or that kind of thing. And yeah, there is a lot of mess in the world, and it is right to see a need and see that in many ways human beings are quite messed up, because people do stuff to each other all the time. I mean, there was a story about this man who stabbed a load of people just last night on the news. So there's such cruelty around, but it's the approach, really. And I think sometimes we feel like we have to be in this position up there to kind of reach down, when actually we can, if we're not on this high level, then we're actually more able to help our fellow human beings, because we're not on this lofty platform. I recently, another book I've recently come across is the pagan roots of Christianity, and well, that's pretty interesting because it goes way back to how Christians adopted the traditions of the day. So you would have well, the early church, if you read the Acts of the Apostles, a lot of stuff was good, what was going on. They were kind of meeting each other's houses, they were helping each other, they were helping the poor, the widows, the orphans. Yeah, a lot of good stuff happened there. I will add though that just because they lived in community, and well, we don't really know if it's community, but we do know that they shared things in common. So some groups have taken that to mean, right, well, that's it. If you're going to be an authentic Christian, you have to live in a commune and reckon that nothing is your own. I mean, okay, I'm just going to put the guitar on for that. That is Communism 101. That is actually not Christianity at all. Although Christians have lived in community, and they still do, and yeah, that's fine. If you want to go and live in a commune, you do that. But you can't read the Acts of the Apostles and say that's what I must do. Yeah, particularly if you're missing the other stuff. Yeah, these pagan roots, and it went on to talk about the Emperor Constantine suddenly decided that everyone was going to be Christian, and so they set up these hierarchies. They set up priests. A lot of what we see in church, the roots are somewhere else. You know, it's like the great speakers. I mean, this church I went to. Now there's two churches here, so when I say the church I went to, I could be referring to either. It was all about the sermon. This was the later one. It was all about the sermon, and it seemed like everything was gearing up towards the sermon, and then the sermon would come, and the pastor would take his position. He would have his notes. He would have his big Bible, you know, and the room would go silent, and no one dared say a word. You know, if you needed to go to the toilet, you better go beforehand. You don't want to be getting up and making those squeaking noises with those chairs and those kids. Well, you better keep them quiet. Apart from the very little ones who weren't in there, they were in the Sunday school. But yeah, but the sermon, like back in the day when we had these great speakers like Hippocrates, Aristotle, yeah, these kind of Greek philosophers, where they were great orators, and people would regard them almost like on a godlike status, because they would have such wisdom, and they would speak for hours, and I think in many ways we've adopted that in the church, and we kind of put these preachers on pedestals. In so many churches, we have a guest speaker, and everyone would be like, "Ooh, who's the guest speaker?" And I think it misses what church is. It's like we have to bring in someone to speak. Is there no one in this group here that has got anything to say? Yeah, I mean, that's a question really, and yeah, what else? Well, the bread and wine, that's become somewhat different. It's, you know, the whole Catholic thing, making it into this something it isn't. You know, the sacraments. And there's something about us. I think we struggle with seeing beyond ourselves, and so we're always looking for a person, an object, to fulfill our needs, really. So it's like when the bread and wine comes, it's like you've got something there, you've got this little cup, you've got this piece of bread. And the Catholic Church, they even believe that it becomes the body and blood of Christ, which is interesting. I'm surprised no one's actually taken it off to to test it to see if there's any DNA in there, or yeah. But I guess that's another matter really. But and again, this video isn't about refuting Catholicism or any of that stuff. It really is just about my observations of church, and the fact that they become like personality cults. Now I use the word cult, and that's, some people will imagine the word cult. Oh, Jim Jones, David Koresh, Charles Manson. But when I say cult, I mean it just means culture. It just means a kind of, yeah, I mean, and so many churches just, it's about the people. It's about the people that are leading, and the little people. They're almost like silent spectators, and so they're muted. Their life is squashed. But that's really not helpful. And I mean, I think it goes way back really to the Israelites. They wanted a king because they just wanted someone to be in charge, and I think it's like that. We want someone to be in charge, and we almost like, even if it's wrong, even if what they're teaching us is wrong, even if their approach is wrong, it doesn't matter because they meet some need within me. So I'm learning really that it's not what other people think, it's not what a leader thinks of me that qualifies me. And I spent many years doing that, just looking for validation, qualification, just by what I did. But it's who I am. It's not, and it's who you are. It's not what you do. Yeah, sure. What things we do can have impacts, of course. I mean, that is not what I'm saying, but it's but yeah, you get the drift. It's who we are. So how to be a bad Christian and a better human being. That's I'm sure this has caused a few stirs, and there's probably someone out there saying, "Oh, that book! Oh, it's full of heresy," because they quote from the Dalai Lama or someone like that. I want to find another one now. There we go. Okay, never mind heaven. What about now? How to be at home in this world? I am so absorbed in the wonder of earth and the life upon it that I cannot think of heaven and angels. I'm not sure who said that. Good God, sorry, bad God. How to make sense of suffering. Life is difficult. This is a great truth, one of the greatest truths. M. Scott Peck. Yeah, I mean, life is tough, isn't it? It's a, yeah, I mean, I don't need to say that really. Now, again, this is, I had someone I knew was very big on prayer, and he would say, look, unless you're praying so many hours a day, your spiritual life is going to be rubbish. And I took that as a pressure at one time, and then I realised, well, actually that works for him. That's what makes him roll. But he's not me, I'm not him. And it's when we push our expectations upon others, that's when we fall foul. And I think that again, that you see that in the church. The pastor will get up there and say, this is what you should do, or the worship team, they're very good at it. They are, come on, you've got to be excited, you've got to be, if you don't get excited, something wrong with you. And of course they're up there with their instruments, they're in the zone, so they're going to be excited. But when you push that on others and say, look, you've got to be excited, otherwise there's something wrong with you. And they wouldn't use those words, I know, but it's almost implied. And it's so sad, it really is, because we're individuals, we are unique, and no one really knows what's going on in someone's life. Well, God does it, obviously God does. Right, this is my final quote. I'm going to stop it there because we've reached half an hour. I think longer videos, people will avoid them. So he's got an hour to sit through a video, so we've got half an hour here. The wing and a prayer, how to talk to God. I don't believe in prayer, I only do it. Sam Keen. Okay, right, so there we go. I just silently prayed then. You didn't need to hear my eloquent words, you didn't need to hear my careful use of King James English. You didn't need to hear my reference to certain scriptures. But yeah, well, I hope you found this helpful, and as I say, I do in my videos I do flip from subject to subject, but I do try and keep them to the point, and eventually we do come back to the point. So please like the video, and feel free to subscribe, and I should be no doubt putting up more. Bye for now.